Matt, you're live.
Okay, we have another person joining us. They're saying they're hoping to find an opportunity in workforce development in and around St. Louis. So we have, no surprise, a lot interested in workforce development. It's a very hot topic today, as employers are finding it challenging to find employees that they need and to plan for the future. At this point, I'm getting ready to introduce the series, but I encourage you all to continue sharing why you're joining us today and maybe your location. As I said earlier, we have people registered from New York, I think maybe all the way to California. So this is a timely topic generating a lot of maybe a little bit of unexpected interest. Just give me a second to pull up my notes. Good morning and welcome to the Workforce Navigator series. My name is Matt Piesel and I'm a labor and workforce specialist located in Kansas City, Missouri. Today's webinar series represents an ongoing effort to connect local business leaders and other stakeholders to timely information that will allow them to make well-informed decisions. Today is an honor to welcome our featured speakers. We have Jamie Kleinsorge, and she is a senior project coordinator for CARES, which stands for the Center for Applied Research and Engagement Systems. We also have the Labor and Workforce Director, Rob Russell from MU Extension, and we have Sam Tennant. He's a project coordinator for all things Missouri and all things broadband with CARES. So today, Jamie, Rob, and Sam will be sharing their experiences about Missouri's workforce development. At this point, I will turn it over to Jamie and she will show us all the wonderful data that's at our fingertips. Jamie.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay and see my screen? Great. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. I am coming to you live from Holt Summit, Missouri, and it's storming outside, so I apologize if anything crazy happens on my end. So, but yeah, I'm so excited to be here with you all today. And while we are focusing on Missouri, I am excited to hear that there are other folks from other states. And so, given that we know that data is sometimes unique across states, I hope to hear from you all from outside of Missouri on what types of data that you're looking at or have access to or that have been helpful to you all as you're doing workforce development across your state. So, but to get started today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a story map that our team at CARES created. And so you can access this story map on our site, allthingsmissouri.org. We have this nice big button here at the top that says Workforce Development. It'll get you to that story map as well as some additional resources that we put together to complement the story map and some of the work that folks are doing. We have a short survey at the top. If you're interested in taking that, you can do that as well. But really wanted to start out just diving into this story map, showing some of the data that we've been looking at, that we've been encouraging others to look at as we are sort of learning more about this changing landscape of workforce. And so I'm sure, as you all, I have been listening to lots of news and podcasts, and everyone's asking the question is sort of like, what's going on, right? Why is there worker shortages? What's really going on across the United States? And so I don't know that anybody has the answer to that yet, but I think that there are some data that can give us a few ideas of what's happening in our local communities. So first, we're looking here at population change. And so this map is actually looking at percent population change, 2013 to 2018, and also labor force participation change. And so these two factors or indicators are significant. As Matthew mentioned, we are all anticipating ACS or census data to be released later this year, and that will give us an updated population change number. Probably county, census tract, zip code level will be able to see some of those population shifts from the 2020 census. But looking at the data that we do have available to us, one thing that we can see is looking at population change across Missouri. we do have some counties that we're noticing that are in dark red here that have seen a decrease, a pretty significant decrease in their population. So we're looking at more than 4% in some of those counties. If you use our swipe layer here, so this nice gray bar that folds across the map, we can swipe over then to that labor force participation change, looking at the same years. And so while this is not always possible to look at the same time frame, anytime you can, obviously look at data that are coming to you from that same type of time frame, maybe the same year or a same 5-year estimate. It's going to give you a much better result in terms of your analysis. Like I said, that's not always possible, but in this case it is. So here we can look and we can see, again, some of those darker pink counties across Missouri are showing a pretty big decrease, more than 5% in labor force participation. And so as we swipe back and forth, we're able to see that there are some counties that are both decreasing, right, in labor force participation and population, which makes sense. But then we do have a few outliers, right, where we see that, for example, this county here, we're looking at they've had a pretty significant increase in rentals in terms of their labor force participation, yet they've also had a pretty significant decrease, right, in terms of their population. And so looking, just wondering if they're, if what local conditions maybe are driving people to relocate there, and then asking the question: Are those new folks having a harder time finding new jobs or jobs once they move in, or folks moving there to retire and they're not there to work at all? So those are some of the ways and the questions that we can ask using these types of data. And so, like I had said, we should have some population change numbers later this year from the census. I think we're all sort of excited to see what those are looking like. We've heard a lot of anecdotes, from the news that people from the coasts are moving inland and people in high housing cost areas are moving. But the question is really where and how, what is the prevalence of that across the counties, especially here in Missouri. So hopefully we'll get some of that updated data. There is some additional information over here on the left-hand side. So just looking at, how to visualize the geographic scope of population loss. And then this last one here is really finding peer counties. And so this is something that we know folks have had success in the past, being able to look for counties, right? Maybe in your state, maybe outside of your state, that have similar populations, similar demographics, similar potential, labor market participation, and they might be doing something different, right? They might be having a lot more success in increasing that labor force participation or attracting new residents to their county. And finding those peers, you can also find some potential new strategies, or you can find some lessons learned. Maybe another county failed in some way, and so you can also use that, right, as a learning experience. So just wanted to point out some of that information there. Moving on through this story map here, looking at commuting. So the question here is, how does commuting and daily travel patterns affect workforce development and economic growth? Well, this map is exciting. When we put it together, we thought it was very interesting to look at both the commuter lines. So each of these red lines represents, yellow lines, they represent about 20 to 25 resident commuters. So that's in-state. And the purple lines are looking at out-of-state commuters. And so It's interesting though, given this information, it already feels very out of date, given the shift in commuting patterns because of COVID. And so I do think information like this, though, this map is very helpful for us to know what the baseline was, right? So what was this like pre-COVID in terms of commuting travel patterns, population loss throughout the day or gain? And then what does it look like now? And I think that one of the, intriguing questions that we can start to ask ourselves is, how do we as folks working in workforce development start to embrace, right, these new commuter travel patterns? I'm sitting in my home right now. I did not travel to campus today, right? And so there are obviously some economic impacts of that. The other thing I want to point out here is obviously you can zoom in and you can get a little bit more granular view. So here we can look at, for example, Camden County. We can see where folks are going up towards Jeff City and down towards probably some areas closer to Lebanon. But we can also click this tab at the bottom here and it'll tell us net change. And so I think that this is pretty interesting as well to look at really what the county, at a county level, what's going on here. So I'm going to move my Zoom screen. And so we can see here on the right-hand side, we get a total commuters for Missouri. But then we are also able to select just, for example, an individual county. If I look back at the full state of Missouri here, you'll see that we obviously have some bigger city catchment areas, right? I mean, that's something that we can just see right off the bat. St. Louis, in this area, you'll see here that they have a net commute gain of more than 500. We also see that around Kansas City, Joplin, Springfield, Columbia, Jefferson City, Cape, all of our major metro areas. And you can see that they're gaining and, a lot of the counties around them are losing folks throughout the day. But we can also see then that there are some counties that are losing more than 3,000 folks to commute every day. And so what does that number look like now, right? How much has that changed? And what are the impacts to local businesses and other employment opportunities because of those commuter travel patterns? We can see here, for example, I think I was looking at Barton County. We've got quite a bit of loss in that county on an average basis, but we're looking at, I zoomed out and zoomed back in. Joplin, on the other hand, is looking at a 4,000 person gain throughout the day. And so while we don't want to take away, right, the commuters from Joplin, we do know that these counties around that area likely are suffering a little bit because they are losing folks, that could spend their money and their time within their home counties. And so some of that obviously may change due to the change in travel patterns because of COVID and just because of the way people are able to work from home. So just want to encourage you to explore both the statewide map, and then, as I mentioned, you're able to zoom in and take a closer look then at each county. And it'll give you an updated set of indicators here on the right-hand side too, that helps you with some of that baseline information. Again, how many commuters live in Boone County? How many live here and work here? How many work somewhere else, how many live somewhere else and drive in. And so I think these are all really important numbers to know. And while I can't recommend, that it should be X number for each of these categories, it is very helpful to know, again, that baseline pre-COVID, what it's going to look like now, and what is going to be ideal for your community, knowing that you are going to lose some folks, but you also want to be attracting them at the same time. There's a few other considerations here on the left-hand side. We know that folks that have higher or longer commutes tend to have longer periods of joblessness when it comes to finding new work. They have increased health risks, obesity, pain, depression, those types of things. And so will we see some shifts in some of those health risks because more people are working from home? Maybe, maybe not. Higher rates of employee absence, and then increased impacts on family and poverty. And so those are just some additional indicators to be thinking about as you're thinking about this indicator around commuting. Next, we'll look at workforce training. And so I imagine that this map could probably grow over the next year, given the funding and other opportunities that are being put towards workforce development. Currently, what we're looking at is the landscape in Missouri, knowing that we have these community college service areas. So that's the base layer that you're seeing here, those bright colors. That's helpful just to know, who serves each area in terms of that community college or technical college connection. We also have locations of chambers of commerce, as we know that they're important anchor institutions to really helping lift up workforce development opportunities in a specific area. We also have area career centers that you see here as the stars around the state. And then we have some additional layers that you can click on here on the left-hand side. So job centers, work-ready communities, which is a designation, and then higher education facilities. And really, this indicator on the map, I think, is, like I said, especially important given a lot of the funding that counties and cities are getting right now in response to COVID, because there are ways to identify the gaps, right? So what are the gaps in Missouri? Where are they at in terms of having access to these types of programs, these types of educational opportunities, and how do we use this the opportunity of COVID, right, to start to fill some of those gaps? And so, just as a high level, we can see very much that, again, our cities look like they have robust access to some of those workforce development resources. But we do see some areas of the state where it looks like maybe folks would have to drive a significant amount of time to get to an in-person instruction or an opportunity. Is that an opportunity to provide things online? Well, maybe. We're going to talk a little bit about broadband after I walk through this story map, because that is another obvious indicator around workforce development that's really important right now. For those of you who are in other states, I would love to hear sort of if our Missouri map you think looks much like your map in terms of the availability of workforce development, education, and support. If we are drastically missing something that your state has that you feel like is successful, or if we have something, that you guys aren't aware of, that would be of interest. So we'll have opportunities for some conversation towards the end. Finally, we have this skills mismatch. And so this is some local data that comes to us from the state department. And so our state Department of Economic Development. And what we're looking at here is really skills mismatch. And so I think, again, this is something else that's really bubbled up in times of COVID, of really understanding that, wow, we don't have enough healthcare workers to support the demand, or we don't have, the service workers, right, for folks that, or for areas that are high tourism areas, they don't have the service workers that they need. And so these maps can really help us understand what areas of the state are experiencing those gaps in what areas. And so what we're seeing here, my mouse is just giving me a hard time, is that we can see this first tab is around healthcare. And so we're able to look at, again, that mismatch between where folks are that we know have those skills in healthcare, so nursing, doctors, other folks that are maybe in healthcare transcription. It kind of runs the gamut, but and then where they're really needed, right? And so we can see that there's what they call a positive gap that indicates a higher percentage of jobs that are being advertised than job seekers. And so we can see here again in the southern part of Missouri and the more western part of Missouri, we have much larger gaps in that healthcare workforce than we do in other areas. There still is just a gap though all across the state, right? So some areas are just more desperate, I suppose, for workers than others. And so we can see that across the major sectors here in Missouri. So looking forward, we have business and sales. Again, we can see that there are areas in the Boot Heel and then in Southwest Missouri where we're seeing those larger gaps versus some of the probably more rural areas here. We also have a science and technology gap that we're looking at. So folks that are working in that S&T world, we can see that that looks great actually around our biggest cities. So St. Louis and Kansas City are really struggling there in terms of attracting the right folks to fill those science and technology jobs. Transportation, we're starting to see here now the kind of the flip side. So there in these green areas, there are more jobs being advertised than workers. In some of the yellow areas then that we're starting to see, there's more workers than there are jobs. So here it looks like we have quite a few workers available in that transportation sector, again, in the southern part and around our big cities. And there's not jobs for them to take versus some of the other areas that you see here in dark green, where there are still more workers than jobs. Continuing on, we have an other category that is kind of a catch-all, but then we get into food services. And I imagine that this map has changed again significantly since COVID. We know that there are lots of folks who are not taking service jobs any longer. And so that also presents its own unique challenges and opportunities for communities that, especially those that are focused or rely a lot on tourism dollars. We see some management and administrative support gaps here across the state. And then I think there's two more. There's two more. So we see construction, installation, and management and repair. So those are looking at those types of repair jobs, folks that come and help with your air conditioner or your car, those types of things. And then we also have that production gap. So these are going to be your major manufacturing jobs. So these maps can really, again, help us align our economic development strategies with the needed employment sectors. And so while we know some things are very obvious, right, going back to like that healthcare map, we know that that is very much still a need across our state and other states to fill those healthcare jobs. We do know that things have changed drastically in terms of food service, tourism services, and those types of things. So I would imagine, like I said, this map is going to look a little bit different. And in the time that we wait, right, for updated data, I think it's really important for you all as, folks that are working locally to be collecting, even if it's just anecdotal evidence, right, of those shifts. Hearing from people and what they're saying is going to give you right now a better idea of what's going on the ground than some of these data will. It is very helpful, though, like I said, to have this as a baseline and something to look back or refer to. So this map, like I said, or this story map is available through All Things Missouri. And for those of you who aren't from Missouri, I apologize that we don't have a national version, but hopefully just knowing the actual indicators that we're looking at will get you a little bit farther faster if you're looking to recreate or develop something along these lines within your state. And so we do have our data cited there for you to be able to look for those indicators in your state. So before we get into conversation, though, I did want to invite my colleague, Sam Tennant, to just talk a little bit about some of the data and resources that we have around broadband in Missouri. And I felt that this was pretty appropriate for this conversation, and also just given where we're at with workforce development, knowing that states like Missouri, there are areas that are really struggling to provide adequate internet services. And because of that, they are potentially losing out, right, on work from home opportunities, and they're not being as flexible or not able to be as flexible with the rapid changes that are happening across workforce in our state. And so I'm going to stop showing my screen here for just a minute. And Sam, turn it over to you just to give us a nice little overview of what's going on in the broadband world.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of context, in 2019, the University of Missouri System took on the topic of broadband as it related to health, economics, and education. We had a really big webinar yesterday, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, so I apologize if this is a little bit redundant. But for those that weren't there, as Jamie was mentioning, as it relates to data with workforce, broadband almost is always a part of the conversation. And we've spent the last couple of years doing research across our 4 campuses, seeing these commuting patterns, seeing these job training and this workforce gap sort of happening, and even starting to see the areas that were able to successfully bring broadband to their communities during this time. Most of them had economic and workforce developers at the table moving these deals forward, because it really almost does come down to providing that case of, if we do bring this amount of internet access, we can see entrepreneurship grow, e-business, telework and telemedicine. We're even seeing real estate agents able to list houses at higher values because they have an internet connection. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but there really is a large increase in what can be expanded based on that. So just for the sake of adding a little bit to the tools of ways you can look at the broadband landscape and the data available, we do have a new business and community needs assessment that we've added to our website called the Missouri Broadband Resource Rail. If you're familiar with CARES or All Things Missouri, this is a really similar tool. And for those that are from other states, if you're interested in having this sort of tool accessible for your areas, feel free to reach out to Jamie and I. We're always working with other states on creating more access to this type of data. But this is just another way to visualize it instead of going through the story maps. The story maps are amazing because they put whoever you're presenting to or having this conversation with into the context of the actual area. But if you're more so just needing a needs assessment of where things currently are, we have a number of the same data in a report system. So for instance, I could click on a couple of counties to report on, or I'm just literally going to pick one for this demonstration and pick on Boone County a little bit. But like I said before, most of that same data we showed as far as population, the population change. We've read so many stories this year of people moving away from expensive cities into lower ones, but still not having that internet access to complete the jobs or work from home that they wish they could. Same as that income and poverty levels. And then when it comes to workforce, those commuting patterns, over 60 minutes, driving alone, public, and then a lot of these unemployment change, jobs and earning, and then the broadband layers themselves. We have a handful of publicly available internet layers that you can come in and kind of take a peek at as it relates to your geography, your population, and the income. So for instance, instead of displaying it on a map, we now have a nice table of all the data we need from the American Community Survey as it relates to broadband access. So this is going to be just for Boone County. There's 70,000 total households, and 51, or I'll just say 52,000 of those have some sort of cable DSL or fiber connection, which is 73%. But then we also get a report that 26% do not have that sort of connection. So, you know, if you hop into the workforce or economic development mindset, how many things are we missing out on this 26? What else could be added to Boone County's value that would make people want to stay, form a new business, make these sorts of connections, X, Y, and Z, the things you all talk about each day in your roles. And then continuing to show maps when available. And so you can sort of get in closer if you hit this view larger map into your individual census tracts. If you've noticed that there are specific gaps in areas that are missing out and folks want to know more, sometimes it's nice to put on a satellite image to see, oh, wow, that's actually a large lake there or something like that. And that's why our number is the way it is. Always interesting to kind of dive in and get a little bit more into what's happening there. And then same, if I scroll down to a different layer, like the Federal Communications Commission reports a much different number as far as broadband access. But what's great about these data tables is we've been collecting a lot of it for a while. So you can start to see some trends over time. Since 2016, how has the internet access actually grown from there? And we do provide that for a number of other indicators as it relates to workforce development. I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I really could talk about broadband for the rest of this time. But as it's been put in the chat, please put in your questions or your thoughts, and we can always show more if there's more interest. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. And, you know, I really wanted to make sure that we hit on that broadband piece because, you know, as somebody mentioned in their comment earlier, you know, they're looking to help, you know, people get connected to jobs. And I think that strategy needs to run parallel, you know, to these other types of broadband expansion strategies, because more and more people are looking for some of those opportunities to work online. And so I would really like to open this webinar up though to more conversation now, and just, you know, really get a sense from you all and from some of our other experts that are here on the call with us today to learn more about, like, what data are you guys using or looking at right now that maybe we didn't include in our presentation today. Why is it, you know, what's being helpful, or why is it being helpful, or, you know, why isn't it being helpful? What's missing? You know, what is something that you would like to see that you just can't get access to, or you don't know that's available? You know, some of those types of questions. So I think I'm going to ask Rob maybe to just share a little bit about what he's been working with in Missouri, and then would encourage you all to either start your conversation in the chat, or we're willing to, I think, unmute people to talk here in just a minute. So yeah, Rob?
Thank you, Jamie, and it's good to be here with you all. A couple of things with data. You know, the maps that you all provide are great visualizations of what's going on, but they alluded to this a few times, and just to make sure it's clear, one of the challenges when we're talking about data, of course, is timeliness, right? And that getting real-time data proves to be challenging, and there are certain ways that you know, that can be challenging there. So in the workforce space, unless you are subscribing to proprietary services, chances are you are not going to be having a lot of access to real-time data. Now, there are workarounds, right? I saw a report from CBRE, which is a real estate investment company, where they actually looked at transitions on that were happening in 2020 due to COVID, and looking where people moved, and they used data that was available through address change requests to look at what sort of address changes were we seeing, and what were they finding. And they overall found that the number of address changes had gone up nationwide, but where people were moving to, they saw a higher increase for people moving between roughly 100 and 500 miles. They saw lower than expected increases for moving within the same county, or less than 100 miles in many cases there, or moving more than 500 miles. So what they saw was that places such as the Bay Area, what was happening there was that more and more people were moving to Sacramento, for example. So there was a big migration to Sacramento out of the Bay Area. In New York, in that area, the migration was occurring with that data to surrounding suburban counties, and not necessarily as much to Lake of the Ozarks, for example. So that's sort of what we are seeing there with that sort of report. That's a very informative report and a great way to think about more real-time data. There's some other proprietary sources that look at job listings and things like that. But again, these are proprietary sources that we have to look at there. For those of you in Missouri, I mean, in my estimation, the best source of publicly available data and the group that does great reports on this is American. I know we have Rhonda on the call from there. They provide a great deal of publicly available information about what's going on both at a regional and a statewide level with labor market and economic development reports more broadly. Other things that we use, Census on the Map is a great resource. It is it's U.S. Census Bureau data, but they will visualize commuting patterns, things like that. The one caveat I will add from that data is that I think their most recent data is 2018 information available. It was released last December. And so there's about a 2-year lag, or there can be a fairly somewhat substantial lag there, but it does provide some basic information about what commuting patterns and things like that look like. Another source that we look at quite a bit, Stats America, which is EDA funded. It's at Indiana University, but they will provide a bunch of information at both at a county and a regional level. Part of what one of the biggest challenges, and there are a lot of ways around this, is to figure out what regions you're looking at, right? Because we live in geographic bound areas that are determined. In many cases, the counties were determined 100, 150 years ago. But as technologies change, then the way people live their lives has changed, and so figuring out how to look at those broader areas is a key part with this. I've also asked my colleague Mark to join us here, and I don't know if he has anything to add on that, but I like to say Mark's my data guy. He's the one that he's who geeks out even more so about data, and really kind of does a lot of work on that in that space. So.
Yeah, Rob, you mentioned a lot of good sources, and I think there's a lot of things to be said for good data aggregators in terms of finding information you need kind of quickly and all in one place, whether it's something like All Things Missouri or Stats America, which is funded by USEDA, or FRED, the Federal Reserve Economic Data put out by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, are all great kind of data aggregators where you can find the information you need right away. I think one of the important things, if you're doing anything with any of these kind of data, is always just kind of important to know, where it comes from and what it, measures, and, because those are important considerations. So some data sources, count employment by basically where people live, and others count by where people work. And so it's kind of important to know those kind of distinctions. There's different data series for the way that the Bureau of Labor Statistics measures employment relies on unemployment insurance data, whereas the way that the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis measures employment takes that, the BLS data and then merges it with a bunch of information from the IRS, for instance. So the numbers can look different. But I think so it's important to know just where your information comes from. But I think the other thing that's kind of important too is just the notion of making a friend, and that don't be afraid to pick up a phone if you're working with some kind of data information, to pick up the phone and talk to people. I have kind of through my career been able to work with a lot of people who work in federal statistical agencies or in state labor market information agencies like Merrick, for instance. And I find that the people that work in those agencies tend to be very passionate about the work that they do, and they are very happy when people use their data, and they're even more happy when people use their data properly. And so while they may seem like nameless, faceless bureaucracies, particularly the ones in DC, whether it's BLS or BEA or whatnot, they're actually filled with really nice people. So make sure you use your phone as something other than to stare at. You can actually use it to make calls and talk to actual live human beings who can probably answer your question a lot quicker and a lot faster than by going through some random internet website or a series of email exchanges. Just actually like pick up the phone and talk to folks. So that's my make a friend strategy. And there's also the be a friend corollary that goes with that too. So never be afraid to answer someone else's questions, or at the very least, shamelessly promote those public federal and state data agencies, because they do great work. So Rhonda, I hope my check's in the mail from the folks at Merrick. But anyway, it's holds true. So.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. It's great to have you join us. And so I would second, what Mark's saying about the phone a friend. I had somebody called me yesterday, even just to ask, should I be looking at unemployment or employment data, right? And, those things do tell you different realities across your county or your region. And no, you can't say that one exactly mirrors the other, right? Because they are counting people, but they may not be counting the same people in the same ways. And so sometimes understanding those nuances, right, we kind of glaze over, but it is important as we're thinking about using these data, right, to make decisions. And so I think that's what's most important. I also love having those conversations too, because I typically learn something, and it's helpful, right, to think about ways in which other communities or counties or regions have used the data, like I said, to either do something successfully or not so successfully. And I know I'm always willing to share sort of what we've done well and what we haven't done well, just to help a friend, right? And don't make the same mistake. Don't think that, it's telling you one thing when it's actually telling you another. So would definitely encourage that as well. Matt or Amy, did you guys have anything you wanted to add?
I mean, you kind of just addressed some of this, but the one thing I was going to ask each of our speakers, what are some great ways of engagement? Mark alluded to it. You did. I mean, there's the phone and the friend concept, but do you have any examples of where you work with community or stakeholders? Like, how can our participants or our attendees like connect with us? Obviously, you can pick up the phone, but what does the scenarios look like, and what are maybe some outcomes of that engagement has looked like? Has someone came with specific data questions, those sort of things. So I'll just toss it out to whoever would like to answer. But just help the audience to really realize the type of tool that we are as individuals, and how we're human beings and not just a map. And then how do we engage and like solve their real world problems?
Yeah, and we'll see if anybody raises their hand, wants to speak up. Well, I encourage folks to join the conversation. I'll say, I think it's really wonderful just looking at the folks that we have here on this call, given that we've got some workforce development specialists alongside some folks from higher education, alongside some folks that work with youth, right? I think that having those three, types of entities involved in any conversation is what's really going to help us address the future, right, of workforce development. I loved that someone said, that she was interested in helping her students figure out what skills they need to be useful and, and get paid well, right, in the future. And I think that's really where we need to be thinking more, is not necessarily, well, we have problems right now that we need to kind of start to fix. What is it that we're looking forward for in the future, working towards together in the future? And I really think having those conversations, we struggle all the time at CARES, like answering the question, who's doing what where, right? And I think if you can get, a couple of organizations from your region just talking about what you're doing and where you're doing it, there's so much, I feel like, that can come from just those types of conversations. And, building on our extension, I would say as much as you can involve youth or young people in those conversations, I think that's going to be really valuable given their expertise and usage of different types of technology. I mean, I don't know that anybody's going to need a videographer in the future. Like the young folks making TikTok videos do a better job, right, at making a video than a lot of folks do, in their professional life. And so there's things like that I think the youth can really bring some perspective around. So yeah, but I welcome others to answer that question as well.
I have just one comment in relation to ways that we can gauge. I'm going to put my colleague Amy Patillo here on the spot, but one thing that we were doing before the pandemic was that we were starting to have workforce summits, and that's essentially just the gathering of the community leaders to start to think collectively, how can we address workforce problems? I'm going to turn over to Amy so that she can talk a little bit about how workforce development engages with communities in order to address those problems on the ground. Amy?
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Matt's referring to the labor and workforce summits that we had back in January of 2020 with Joplin and Houston, Missouri. And it was a great opportunity for us to partner with our local economic developers and our workforce partners to come together and talk about what their community is doing in the area of workforce, the needs that they have, and how we can continue to partner. And now that we have the data available and the workforce storyboard map with CARES, that is even more resources that we can provide to the communities. When we met in Houston, Missouri, they said, we've always wanted to do this. We've always wanted to bring the group together, and we don't know why we hadn't. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for our nonprofit groups to get together, and some of our religious associations and especially our school districts, they're all working in the area of workforce, but they just aren't coming together and doing it as a community. And we also learned about several projects that they had been working on, and due to people leaving the area or people transitioning to new jobs, there were some holes that needed to be filled. And so we were able to focus on some of the other projects that we could work together on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amy. Were you going to add something, Rob?
I was just going to add, one of the questions I saw that came up was how to help students better understand what opportunities are available at a local region. And I'll just put a plug in again for Merrick. They actually do real-time labor market summaries, and they have identified jobs as now, next, and later jobs. And you can find that information on their website, and they talk about number of job openings. It's by workforce region, but they talk about number of job openings. They talk about wages in that. They talk about the type of job and things like that. And so again, that's a great publicly available resource. It's not going to get down to the level of what are the jobs available in the west side of Columbia, Missouri, right? But at a regional level, it gives you a great idea of what that looks like.
We have a bit of a conversation going in the chat here, but one thing I would add is a great example of communities engaging in workforce development is in the North Kansas City region. NEBA stands for the Northland Education Business Association, and it brings together a consortium of local school districts, their administrators, as well as local business leaders, the EDCs, the chambers of commerce, and they meet monthly and they have the conversations about what are our current workforce needs, what do we need in the future, and how can we, integrate the learning experience so that it includes visits to businesses so that students understand what the future is. It includes job fairs so that the parents understand that, oh, there are, living wage jobs in manufacturing. Maybe my child doesn't want to go to college, but maybe there are other career pathways out there for my children. So it's kind of an integrated approach between business and education, trying to understand where the jobs of the future are, as well as how do we get there? Because oftentimes we find that each segment of the workforce development is kind of doing their own thing and staying in their own lane. They're not always having a conversation about what do we need in the future, because oftentimes people are focused very much on their present need, but not always looking out towards the future. And did you have anything to add to that, Jamie?
Yeah, well, I really just kind of wanted to ask the question to the group and to you all around, is there is this a good time really to start having those conversations, given some of the recovery and resilience planning that should be going on, right? And some of the, the funding that's coming to communities to support recovery and resilience. I just know that I've heard a lot of communities say that they've got more money now than they had pre-COVID, but they don't necessarily have a plan to spend it, right? And so I kind of feel like now is a good time to start putting heads together, right? To think about some of these things. People are interested in workforce summits. That's great too.
I see we are generating a lot of comments there. And in fact, we even have some people from NEBA here. We have participants who participated in the Houston the Houston Workforce Summit, as well as the Joplin Workforce Summit. So we got a lot of people actually in the room here that have actually engaged with us in the past and seen the different ways we can help facilitate that conversation and that connection. And just like the workforce summits, moving into the future, Extension is going to be helping communities engage in the broadband conversation as well. And so just kind of prelude to what's going to be happening in the future in the next 6 months or more is that Extension specialists across the state are going to be helping facilitate that conversation at the local level for the communities that are trying to address those broadband needs. So that's another way that workforce development and broadband is linking together. An article I read just yesterday talked about how, while not all employees want to relocate, they do want more flexibility in the work schedule. So being attractive for a business moving in the future, can you allow part of the workday to be remote or create more flexibility? The data cited in that case was that 4 million people quit their job in April, which was a relatively high number in the United States, looking for new work, not because they lost their job, but because they're looking for new opportunities. And in that article, they're really talking about how some of what's driving that relocation of jobs or job hopping is the fact that they want more flexibility or more ability to spend time at home, maybe less commuting. Those sort of factors are leading people to maybe reevaluate how they work or even when they work. They're not necessarily looking to move across the country or somewhere remote and beautiful, but they are looking to gain more control of their day-to-day activities. So that's just something to consider as we try to address workforce shortages. Is there a way that we can adjust the way we work in a way that's maybe the hybrid model that's not purely remote, but not also purely on the site? Granted, some jobs won't allow that. Manufacturing is really hard to assemble your automotive from your home. So again, it just depends on the type of work that's being done.
Yeah, and I don't want to put Rhonda on the spot, but Rob said that she was with Merrick, and I wonder if there are any. I know that they just released like some Q4 or Q1 employment data. I don't know if there's anything else that might be of interest to the folks on this call. Rhonda, if there is anything, feel free to speak up and let us know.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. And so Rob probably doesn't know this, but I jumped to the Office of Workforce Development on January 1st, still closely related to Merrick. I talk to them every day, and in fact, like less than an hour ago. So the Q4 data, I'm guessing, is the QCEW data, just knowing the timing. And that's one thing that I've really wanted to monitor, like starting pre-COVID, to check the number of establishments and employment and see how those changes have happened across the different regions of the state. So I think that that's really valuable information to everyone so that we can tell what types of occupations might be expanding or retracting based on some of those, some of the staffing patterns within those industries. One thing that I'll also note that Merrick has a lot of resources to help educators in talking with students of any age, whether they be adults or in school. So there are career pathways that are mapped for 11 different industry groups. And it starts, we use a now, next, and later definition to really define the education and training levels for different occupations. So now occupations are those that require something like short-term, like a month or less, and maybe a high school diploma. The next occupations are kind of middle skill occupations. So students can even get their first level of certification or training while they're in high school in a CTE program. And later occupations are those that require a bachelor's degree. So it really kind of helps speak to that career pathway that can be started even when a student is in a junior or senior year of high school. So that's really useful. I'm glad that you mentioned the real-time labor market summaries. They're always great with that quarterly snapshot of the job ads that are being placed. One other resource that I'll note too is resources for recovery from the COVID pandemic. So there's been some skills mapping done for some of the hardest hit occupations from layoffs. So admin and support, food service, and sales are those that were hardest hit by layoffs. And those skills have been mapped to other occupations that people can jump into right now. But it's also mapped to other occupations where some additional training might take place to help people reskill and upskill to put themselves in a better position in the labor market. So those are a couple of things that I'll just note quickly that are happening in Merrick, and we're using them in the workforce system in our job centers to assist customers that come into our centers.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot there.
Yeah, well, this is the only thing I had on my calendar today, so I really didn't, So excuse the appearance, but I'm getting a lot done today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And the Merrick website, and I'm sure the Office of Workforce Development as well, is just always a great resource. So, yeah.
Hey, Jamie, we did have a question. Maybe you could quickly field it in the chat.
Story map data and report format. Oh, yes. Yes, we can respond with a link. So I'll get that and get that in the chat. Or Sam, if you're still listening, she's looking for that business and community report. So yeah, we can get that to you, no problem. I'll say though, one other thing, I'll share my screen here just really quickly. One other shout out for some of the things that we are trying to always update data on all things Missouri. So outside of that story map, we also have some other great data that have been updated that may be helpful just as you're having those, hopefully those conversations, right, with some of the other workforce development players in your area. So we have some things related, some updated data related to residential vacancies. Since alluding to Rob's conversation, we know sort of people are moving and we know the housing market's a little bit crazy right now. We have some business vacancy data, and you can see % in total on these. But I also really like looking at duration, just because it gives you a better sense of, is a building or an area sitting vacant for long, or is it really short? That can be helpful. We had added some rural hospital closure data as well for those rural areas. This is obviously something that is important to both workforce and health for your community. And then the last couple that we have added most recently from the Urban Institute are around debt. And I think that, folks, while it's not a one-to-one correlation between, people's debt and their willingness or wanting to work or grow in their job field, I think it is very helpful for us to know what communities and what families are dealing with. And so here we can see things like medical debt. We also have credit card delinquency. And then finally, some income from transfer payments. I included this because it includes things like unemployment, SSI, And I know a lot of people are kind of throwing out right now that, unemployment is causing a lot of these issues. And I won't say one way or another. I'll provide you just with some data to maybe investigate that a little bit more on your own. And so, yeah, these are all still available in the All Things Missouri map room. And so we're just excited to share some of those additional resources as well.